What's up, future shred lords? Welcome back. Down to the fingers. We're back in the saddle. We're playing. It wasn't too bad. Even decided to push the envelope there a little bit at the end. Didn't come off too bad. That was like the fourth take. I was like, you know what? It's good enough. Keeping it. We're going to talk a little bit about how to spruce up the minor pentatonic scale today. This is a question that I'm often asked. They're like, how do I start combining these ideas but I don't get overwhelmed? Because as soon as I start going outside the boundaries of the pentatonic scale itself, I start getting lost. So we're going to talk about some basic principles about what you can do, and you can try them out for yourself. That's why we kept the backing track pretty straightforward with bass and drums. And of course, it opens up, of course, the field, if you will, with respect to the types of sounds you can use and the different types of flavors you get from that. And that's really important right there. I'm still using 3 notes per string, diatonic scales, the minor pentatonic scale. Nothing has changed. I'm just moving it from one position to another one. And when I do that, I get a different flavor, right? And last but not least, of course, I do a juicy little arpeggio run using dominant 7 and call and answer. Okay, so again, you start to see these basic music principles start to factor in so that when you play a solo like that, it starts to mesh together because the ideas don't come off as always being, a lot of the same. You start to break it up into little chunks, phrases is what we call it, or even, longer passages, and you start to lump them together by techniques. So in the first instance, I keep it pretty real. But then when I move to the middle, I start to go outside to create some tension, which lets me resolve the tension by moving back into the key, but doing an arpeggio sequence. So it changes it from scales now to arpeggios. So you start to see this movement. It's not just, from scales to scales. In this case, I move from in the key to slightly outside the key. And then, of course, when I move to the arpeggios, now you're talking about resolution from one arpeggio to the next, dominant 7 to minor 7 flat 5 to major 7. So we're going to talk all about it. We're going to go over the basic pillars and then start to incorporate these ideas into your own practice sessions. It's when you start to experiment like this, you take 2 elements and you start to develop one and you take the other and then you try to put them together in some sort of musical sense that comes out sounding like a piece of music rather than a practice exercise. That's when you know you're really cooking with gas, because you'll start coming up with solos that sound more like that rather than ones that sound like, paint by numbers, if you will. And that's really what you're missing. That's the mojo. It's your ability to connect these ideas together really quickly is not as quick as it needs to be, right? So you got to practice that. But how do you do that? By spreading it out more and understanding about how to move between these little musical chunks, right? Playing diatonically to moving outside to resolving using an arpeggio sequence. Job's done. Let's get into it. All right, with that first idea there, you basically see me pairing up the minor pentatonic scale with the major scale. Now, I've talked about this many times before. This is one of the most powerful tools you have under your belt because it's not that hard. Okay, you're just going to choose a few notes here and there to fill in the blanks. You know what I'm saying? So if there's only 2 notes on every string with respect to the minor pentatonic scale, but in other instances, when you're talking about 3 notes per string in the same position, well, you just tack on that 3rd note to create something a lot more sophisticated. And it's not really, it's just you're starting to add this one more flavor, throw in some chromaticism, and boom, those sort of, more pedestrian pentatonic licks become supercharged, and they just take your face off. Once you start playing them fast, and it's relatively easy to do that because you already know, or should know, both these systems quite well. So don't miss out on this one. This is one I slept on for quite some time. And trust me, later on, when you start doing superimposition, taking this whole system, the pentatonic and the major scale, the diatonic scale, moving it around to another key like we're going to talk about in the next section here, then it sounds absolutely phenomenal. That's how you get the fusion sound. Okay, so trust me, this is the gateway of being able to do that, is just taking this more simple scale and beefing it up. And how are you going to do that? It's up to you. When I started out, of course, I'm in the Dorian position, so I matched up Dorian and the Dorian pentatonic before moving all the way up to the Mixolydian position. And I ended with that very simple sort of major 7 arpeggio using the 3 octaves principle, right? So again, things I've shown many times, but you can see by putting them together like that, you get this really killer effect. And that's what you need to start practicing. And instead of just doing the tired old major 7, do like a major 7 sharp 5 next time and be like, what? And be surprised, be like, okay, I got to kind of adapt over here with respect to the augmented. So that opens more doors for you to play around with. Let's get into the next section. All right, in this section here, basically all I did was the initial backing track, I felt like G major and E minor worked really well. So what I did was just move to C major and superimpose C major now over top of this G major backing track, or what I felt like it. And you get that effect where you see me play C major and I kind of dipsy doodle around, ending in F Lydian, of course. And of course you're like, F Lydian, yeah, that's weird because there's normally F sharp in G major, or you should have known that, right? So this is another way of really maximizing the pentatonic. You can just ditch the 3 notes per string altogether and just do the pentatonic scale at C major now, and it'll sound absolutely killer. But of course, starting to factor in the 3 notes per string stuff just to change it up from the previous pentatonic kind of flavor is going to be obviously beneficial, and to, of course, take it to the next level with respect to keeping the listener engaged. I start using sequences and little patterns and whatnot. So I'm just seeing that 3 notes per string pattern itself as like the template, and then I just kind of feel my way through it. It's up to you to basically get good enough to be able to just switch directions and do little patterns and sequences and contour scales and the whole 9 yards, interval scales, just on the fly instantaneously. And it just takes a lot of practice, and you got to start to factor that into your practice session. Instead of just playing the scale up and down, start doing it in thirds, do it in fourths, fifths, sixths, do sequences, groups of 4, groups of 5, groups of 9, groups of 7, whatever it is. That's how it works. You have to take the initiative, but once you do, you can start to utilize it superimposed like I do in C major here. And of course you get that more outside and really interesting and pleasing sound, right? Because it instantly breaks up a monotony of playing in the same key all the time. I was starting off in the diatonic key. Now I've moved outside of the key, but to another key that's sympathetic. The 4th degree of G major, right? It's plagal cadence, one of the big ones. So obviously I could have done Mixolydian, which would have given me D major. That would have sounded really badass too. Works really good with the pentatonic scale again, but in this case I was like 3 notes per string. Done. So I'm effectively playing, I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to figure it out in another way, and I'm not doing that right now. So there it is, okay? Playing in C major when you're playing in G major or D major is going to sound. Working that in there. Magnifique. Get on it. Let's look at the last section. right, last but not least here, obviously, is the arpeggio sequence. No big deal. I started to notice something. I was messing around with the backing track, and again, this is something that you should be aware of. It was something tickling me in the back of my mind when I was making that transition. It's like, you know, you should do something with that. So I started messing around with it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, no, I remember now. This was the backing track I made up when I was messing around with dominant 7 transitions. And so I decided to do that, but I wanted to do like this mirror image idea. So I start off with D7 in the root position, right at the 10th fret at the low E string. And then I jump down to the Phrygian position and I do an E minor 7, of course, in the second inversion. From there, I jump down to the Dorian position and I play the F sharp minor 7 flat 5. Now that one's happening, of course, in the first inversion because he's starting off in Locrian with the root, right? And then, of course, from there, obviously, I want to go from 7 back to 1. So it makes a lot of sense for me to go from this arpeggio based off the 7th degree all the way down to the 7th degree and set up the major from there, right? It creates like a connection there between those two elements rather than just go right to the root G. If I go all the way back down to the F sharp again from where I was, it creates a really killer sort of connecting piece there. Just that one note, which smooths out the transition between these two arpeggios. A lot of people don't realize that 1 or 2 notes can make all the difference between making something sound really awkward to really badass. Food for thought. So, and obviously in the Locrian position there, I can play the third inversion of the major 7 and just ascend. So, not rocket science kind of situation. The first thing is memorizing the positions of the diatonic scale and mapping out the minor pentatonic scales, the 3 notes per string system. I would definitely recommend Caged just for starting out with chords and whatnot. And of course, those pair up nicely with the triad arpeggios and dominant 7 arpeggios, which is another reason why Caged is quite useful. It's not the be-all end-all, but it's good. So, you know what I mean? Once you start to master those elements, it's about putting them together, combining them into some sort of interesting solo. And you have to practice that a lot. It just doesn't come to you. Just because you know the scales doesn't mean you know how to solo. I'm sure a lot of you have already figured that out. So basically what you have to do is start learning to combine the elements and then start making subtle alterations. Work your ideas. Don't just play something and be like, it's good enough, I'm done. Sort of sit there and figure it out a little bit and be like, okay, I got to do this and then get this. And then work with the backing track until you can get it up to speed and move to the next element and play that. So if you actually sit down and plan it out a bit more, be a little bit more rigid and be like, I want to play just this, rather than be like, well, it's kind of like this. And then move to this one, it's kind of like that. Instead be like, it's this, moving to this. There's some sort of training process that sharpens the mind. And you get very good at being able to instantly visualize that on the fretboard and then just play it. That's why I can sort of connect them together relatively quickly, because my brain can just be like, oh yeah, do that one here. And so I only have to remember the name and the position. Be like, do minor 7 flat 5 at Dorian. I already know that's going to be the first inversion of F sharp minor 7 flat 5. That's important information, but not something I'm going to use when I'm soloing. Instead, I'm going to be like, oh, look, if I just move down a whole step here, I'm into Dorian. I can play minor 7 flat 5, which sets me up perfectly to go to the major 7 and end my idea. And of course, I just go on after that with a little shred because I was just testing the limits of the finger. But you get the idea. That right there is some of the most crucial elements that is necessary for most people to successfully navigate the fretboard and create memorable solos. Is this idea that you're not just, you know, playing cool licks in the minor pentatonic and 3 notes per string, but you're starting to incorporate other music elements like outside sounds, like arpeggio sequence that take advantage of tension and release and create, you know, like a pathway, if you will, to get back to home base, setting up home base in the first place with the first lick. So it's all relative. You got to have like sort of like a loop. And then later on, you can start to mess with that as much as you want. But initially, just work on creating the loop. You start and establish home base. you move to another position outside, and then you use something else to bring you back to home base. And each one of these points, you know, the three little sections here should be something different. So you're using the minor pentatonic to 3 notes per string to arpeggios in this case. Done. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. Of course I do. And, you know, just take it slowly. Think objectively about what it is that you're doing, and then lay out your practice schedule accordingly. Don't just fly off in 200 directions. Focus your mind, focus your priorities and your goals, and then work exclusively on those ones hard for a couple weeks or a month, and then start to change it up and factor in new elements, and then just keep doing that. Keep upping how much time you get on the fretboard. Keep working the mental stuff so that you're good at putting ideas together, breaking down the fretboard, understanding the positions, the diatonic scale, substitutions, superimposition, the whole 9 yards. Right. I think that's enough. Wish you all the best, and we'll talk to you in the next one. Of course we will. We'll see you on Thursday. Peace.